I used the phrase "Bubba Misa" today while chatting with a brand new acquaintance, and they, like some of you, just gave me a puzzled look. A what? A Bubba Misa, a grandmother's story, a tall tale. If you make 3 love matches happen, you get a space in the world to come. If your ears turn red, suddenly it means someone's speaking Lashon Hara about you. If you hold the Havdalah candle just a little bit higher, it'll mean you'll grow. They're little wisdoms that have little to no common sense or basis. And yet the years go by, and we never seem to shake them. There's actually a few very specific ones of these in my life. For instance, I say the Shema constantly while I'm flying, when we're taking off or whether we're landing. If I am awake, I am saying the Shema. And it's not because I think, well, maybe if I don't say the Shema, the wings will fall off the plane, but why take the risk? It's worked so far. Similarly, my beloved mother-in-law will call out to the angel Michael whenever she loses something, and she's always trying to get me in on that ritual. Another one of my chavrutas told me that her rabbi's mother told her once that if you open up the Chumash blind and you point to a single word, that word has something to do with your besheret. And finally, possibly my favorite, one of my friends and roommates in Jerusalem refused to ever walk past a burnt-out building on Shabbat, not because it was dangerous, but because, and this is the quote, if there's going to be a demon, it's going to be in there. Superstitions, Bubba Mises. Our Reform ancestors, the founders of our movement who lived during the 19th and early 20th century, did not care for such superstitious, folksy line of thinking. To them, Judaism was an ethical philosophy rooted in logic. Judaism's great light, which one day all the nations of the world would see, was that we are an ethical, logical people, capable of explaining the world without silly ritual or an old world mysticism. Theirs was a rationalist emancipation stemming from all things can be discovered, which was the zeitgeist of the time, and rooted, of course, ever in the philosophical prophetic call of morality in the Torah. That vision of Reform Judaism excised and altered things which had been long-standing ritual. The resurrection of the dead, for instance, was abandoned, instead looking towards the perfection and immortality of the human soul. Angels and an invisible world were dismissed as primitive perspective, which could be explained only now through science and logic. As I'm sure many of you know, kashrut and ritual items were put aside so that the Jew could be, quote, a gentleman in the street. And my favorite, perhaps most famously, our early reformers also changed their perspective on where we should turn our hearts or our centering inside of the Jewish world. We no longer needed to turn east towards Jerusalem, and we never needed to really talk about the land of Israel. Since after all, the New Jerusalem, the New Israel was this, the New World, a place completely full of Bubba Mises. And if you think I'm making it up, just take a look at our sanctuary, which of course is not built facing towards Jerusalem. This week, we read Parshat Khukat, a rich, diverse Torah portion which opens up with the description of the para adumah, the red cow, the red heifer. It is a challenging, odd ritual firmly rooted in cult, the priestly definition of purity, and duty and sacrifice. The red heifer is strange, though. It's necessary. It removes the impurity of death so that people can serve in the temple. But the way it does so is odd. It takes 7 pure priests, each of whom need to become impure, while slaughtering an animal so rare that some scholars genuinely believe that we have mistranslated the very verse. How can purity come forth from a ritual which causes impurity? How can a necessary ritual that you need to perform constantly require a nearly mythical creature? It, in fact, seems to make no sense. And our Midrashic tradition is aware of it, saying, who could possibly cause purity to come from the impure? Only the one who caused Abraham to come forth from Terach and the next world to come forward from this one. It is the one who commands so, the one who decrees so. It can only be the one, the singular, the only. It is, on a technical level, a Khukat, one of the laws of God which is utterly, completely, and totally unknowable. There's no wisdom to it, there's no logic to it, there's no sense to it. It is simply put, a law. And Rabbi Joshua teaches in the name of his master, Rabbi Levi, that it is one of 4 such things, and whenever we study them, this is the best part, the evil inclination is right there, very excited to remind us about how irrational and contradictory these commandments are. Even the ancient rabbis of the Talmud didn't understand how such a chukat could possibly exist. So why then is it still something that we learn about, read about, and center so firmly in our faith? Our Reform ancestors believed that this was a relic for another time, and you treated it like any valuable relic. Put it into a museum, study it, date it, leave it be. Spend your time on the things that matter, the things which explain the world, the things that make the world a better place. And while I admire their revolutionary zeal, I do admit that I find myself split. There are days when my faith is made stronger thanks to our classical Reform tradition, when we weave in history and anthropology and philosophy. And there are days when I need the mystery, and I need the unknowable, and I need the certainty of the rabbis. There are days when everything is spinning and swaying, and it actually comforts me very much to know that there is simply something immovable in the center. And while there's no reason to think that I or any other human being can ever comprehend it, I take comfort in knowing that it exists, it has existed, and it will continue to exist, unchanging and unchanged. And if you think that this is a strange thing, I would argue that this is actually one of the truths of the world. Sometimes we are stronger and brighter and more effective when we understand the essential truth of a thing, having turned it over again and dissected it. And sometimes our truths are best when they are simply accepted. I do not need to know the reason, biological or sociological, that I loved my tiny, screaming daughter from the moment that I first laid eyes on her, the moment she was born. For me, it is simply a chok of the world. I do not need psychological or political logic to know why I feel a certain way the moment my feet land in Jerusalem. It is simply a chok of the world. And at times when I look at the inexplicable happening all around me, love and light, death and pain, I do not necessarily need to interrogate it with logic and explanation. Sometimes I simply need to know that there is a truth in the world. 2 stories from rabbis I deeply respect. The first from Rabbi Rachel Miller, and she knows I often quote her on this. I think it gives her some pleasure. She says, "I do not believe in God that is either Avinu nor Malkeinu, neither father nor king nor male nor dominant. I believe in a complicated God, a complex God rooted in years of Jewish study and synthesized with modern philosophy." And for 10 days a year, I put that all aside, and I join myself to the untold generations of Jews who have bowed before the open ark, and for 10 days I believe in Avinu Malkeinu with a full heart. And if that's not to your flavor, the second one is from a rabbi who is no stranger to these halls, Rabbi Dr. David Ellison, former president of the Hebrew Union College. And Rabbi Ellison shared this story with my wife Taylor when she was one of his students about how there was a day when he was sitting with another very respected rabbi from the Reconstructionist movement. And this Reconstructionist rabbi had just finished authoring the Reconstructionist prayer book. And Rabbi Ellison's son was sick. And his friend, who was sitting by him, turned to him and asked him if he wanted to pray. And in this moment, these two rabbis, one who is the inheritor of the Reform tradition, the foremost Reform rabbi in the world, steeped in logic, steeped in the rejection of the illogical, and the other one who has literally just finished writing the prayer book that believes only in a God as a principle of morality and never as a being who acts in history, they both prayed for healing. As Rabbi Ellison said, why don't we pray to the kind of God that neither of us believe in, and perhaps he will heal my child. Our Torah portion this week offers up a moment of the ancient. It is a moment of the ancient which is impossible, illogical, and inexplainable. And there are weeks that this does not actually need to be a challenge. There are weeks instead that this can be a comfort. There are weeks that we need logic and reason and answers. And there are weeks when we simply need to know that there is a truth and that we are not alone. May this week be such for those in need. Shabbat Shalom.